This past weekend, my soon-to-be wife Alexa and I had just settled down for a night of movies, pizza and cuddling. We live in a residential area right outside of town. Our home's situated right across the street from a Presbyterian church, with a large cemetery behind it. Most of our neighbors don't own pets, but there's one in particular across the street, and downwards a bit, who owns perhaps the loudest, most annoying dog to ever exist. Quite an annoyance on a night like tonight, but luckily it was quiet for the entire evening. It's around 10 p.m. and we're lying down watching a film in our living room when the loudest dog on earth begins to go off. Unfortunately, there wasn't much we could do, except maybe confront our neighbor or file a noise complaint, but who wants to be the neighbor that does that? After about 5 minutes, I get up off the couch and decide to walk over to our neighbor's home and say something about the dog. As I headed outside and made it to their driveway, unfortunately, I noticed that the neighbor wasn't home. Their only car wasn't there. I decided anyway to walk up to the door and ring the bell. After a minute or two of no one answering, I gave up and I headed back towards home. I noticed that Alexa had stepped outside and was looking on towards the direction of the barking. I told her that no one was home and that we should either ignore it or finally file a complaint. Nobody should have to deal with a loud dog at night, especially if you're trying to unwind after a long day of work or are trying to sleep. Alexa and I head back inside for a bit, and finally after about 10 minutes, the dog ceases to bark. Alexa and I laugh for a bit, continuing our film. But of course, not long after that, the dog starts up again. But this time, it sounded vicious. I got up and went outside and approached our neighbor's fenced-off backyard, and I saw the dog, who must have heard or saw me coming. It stopped barking, walked up to me, and began to pant in the cute way dogs do. I chuckled and said the dog's name, to which he looked at me and sat down. Such a good animal, even if he's loud. I then heard something that sounded like somebody walking through leaves coming from behind me and to the right. I turned around to see somebody looking at me from behind a gravestone in the cemetery. The dog must have heard this as well. As it sprung up and began to bark in the direction of the gravestone, I looked on as the person continued staring in my direction, and as the dog continued to bark, I looked towards my house where I saw Alexa standing near her car, looking at me with a confused look on her face. I looked in horror as I saw the person reveal himself from behind the gravestone. His forehead and cheek was stained red with blood, dripping off of his chin. In his hand was some sort of dagger. The dog began to go ballistic as the person took a few steps in our direction before stopping. I turned to the dog, then back at my home. Alexa, who was still outside, yelled out to me asking what was wrong. I told her to call the police. She said, "Why? The dog?" To which I replied, "He's fucking armed." Probably confused, Alexa went inside to grab her phone as I continued to watch on as the person now began to back off, with the dog going berserk. It was going to take a bit of time for someone to reach our home, so I readied myself to get in self-defense as I watched the man finally turn around and walk away towards the back of the cemetery and towards the woods. When the police finally arrived, the person was long gone and I was stuck there explaining to a couple of skeptical officers about my encounter. They didn't seem to take me that seriously, but still investigated the area as I explained to Alexa about the person I saw. When the police left after finding no trace of anyone, Alexa and I didn't feel much better. We locked our doors and windows, and I decided to call our neighbors to fill them in on everything before heading back to continue our movie night. When I was a teenager, I was goth. Black hair, black clothes, black makeup, and I even had a pair of combat boots. My friends and I, in typical goth fashion, hung out at the local cemetery. We started going as a joke, but soon discovered we liked the peace we found there. But that all changed one night. My friend called to see if I wanted to hang out, and I did. None of our other friends were available. They were either working or recovering from partying the night before, so we were on our own. My friend picked me up and we drove up to the cemetery. We were hanging out, smoking cigarettes, and bullshitting around about the latest issue she was having with her boyfriend when we noticed at the top of the hill we were on, about 100 feet away, a bonfire had been lit. You have to understand that this cemetery is about a block off campus of a major university, and it's not uncommon for college students to go there to party. But my friend and I sighed, knowing that we would have to get going soon. It was illegal to be in the cemetery after dark, and we knew the police would show up because some jerks had decided they needed a bonfire. We decided to finish our cigarettes and then take off. But just then, the most horrible stench came from down the hill, from the direction of the bonfire. My friend gagged and covered her mouth. I groaned and said, "What the hell?" My friend shook her head, saying, "I don't know what they're doing. Let's just leave." We get in the car, and one of us suggested, I honestly don't remember who, Maybe we should just go up and see what they're doing. My stomach turned and a cold shiver went through my body. My friend must have had the same feeling because at the same time, we both said, no, we should leave. My friend turned the car on, switched on her headlights, put the car in reverse, and looked over her shoulder before starting to back up. I was still looking up the hill. Then a figure stepped in front of the bonfire. I could only see a silhouette, but I was sure whoever it was watching us. A feeling of terror hit me and I said, go, go, go. Getting louder and more panicked with each word. My friend looked back up the hill for a second, and just as the figure took a step toward us, she slammed on the gas and peeled out, going in reverse down the hill. She rammed the gear shift into drive and we were out. We didn't say anything for a while until she said, what the hell were they burning? I shook my head. I don't know. She dropped me off at home and I went to bed. But the next morning I woke up and went out to the kitchen. My mom was there drinking her morning coffee and I joined her. We talked about our job for a bit when she suddenly comes out with, did you hear what happened last night? I shrug and say no. I had just woken up. She tells me that a woman she worked with was kidnapped from the parking garage. Oh my god, I say. Did they find her? Yes, but it's too late, she replies. My brain was going a mile a minute, the realization slowly creeping up. Whoever took her had sexually assaulted her and murdered her. They found her this morning up in the cemetery. They had tried to dispose of her body in a bonfire. The realization slowly creeping up. That's what that smell was. Needless to say, I never hung out at the cemetery at night again. I think back to our decision to leave instead of investigating the fire. That one decision could have changed everything. I was drunk as hell one night and walking home from a bar. Between the bar and my house is a pretty large cemetery. Lots of old graves, big trees, and generally a creepy place. I love this cemetery for their historic graves and quiet, and often take walks through here. In my drunk-ass state of mind, I see the cemetery as a shortcut home. I start climbing the 10-foot chain-link fence, swing a leg over the top, and prepare to jump into the grass. But my pants get stuck and I fall. At one point I'm literally hanging there. My pants rip and I fall face first into the ground. I start walking down the path that leads towards the entrance of the cemetery, which is across from my house, limping and holding my shoulder while drunkenly cursing my foolishness. But I hear a noise and look up. It's a couple. They're about 10 yards ahead of me standing in the moonlight. But then they flip the fuck out, like screaming and turning around and running full bore out of there. I can't stop laughing and take my time hobbling toward home. As I'm approaching the entrance, I notice a car pulling into the cemetery. I suspect it's the cops or someone coming to investigate the screaming, so I duck behind a large headstone. The car is full of more people, and these ones are out for a ghost hunt, packing cameras and audio recorders. Well, screw it. I've already spooked 2 people. I wait until they walked about 20 yards into the darkness, and I start tossing pine cones while staying hidden. The first pine cone hits the gravel path behind them, and the next 2 ricochet off of a tree, and fly into the graveyard. All the kids in the car freeze and look at each other. I toss one more cone and start to make the best evil cackling laugh that I can manage. Needless to say, the kids flip the fuck out and run to the car and peel out and flee. I stumble into my house laughing my ass off and enjoy a celebration joint. I know I'm an asshole, but I just had to fuck with those kids. I mean, come on, how could you not? I was someone's let's not meet. This happened a few hours ago, and upon waking up and thinking about it, I realized that I most likely just scared the crap out of some poor old man. To start though, you have to understand the situation that I recently found myself in. My beloved cat, we'll call him Billy, went missing about 2 weeks ago. I've completely plastered my neighborhood in posters, begging for anyone who sees him to contact me. Today, after weeks of silence, I got a call from a woman claiming to have spotted Billy by the graveyard behind my house. So naturally, I got dressed and headed out to search for him. But again, some background information is needed. This weekend, I came down with an awful cold. I've been sick for days and my nose has gotten so dry, sometimes it just pours blood. My hair is matted and my voice currently sounds like Shirley Temple. My fever has me constantly drenched in sweat, so overall I'm a mess. After walking the perimeter of the graveyard and my neighborhood, I decided to walk through the graveyard and search for him in there. So in I strolled, calling, "Billy," over and over again. As I got deeper in the cemetery, I came across a car. It seemed to be some old man who was dropping off flowers for someone, but but I just kept walking and calling out for my missing cat. As I got closer to the man, I noticed he was staring at me and backing away. I found his behavior kind of strange, but being sick and exhausted, and solely focused on finding my cat, I just ignored it and I kept walking. As soon as I walked past him though, I heard a car door slam. By the time I turned around to see if he was okay, he was speeding out of the cemetery. I finished my walk and went home, and I fell asleep. It was only upon waking up that I realized how creepy that must have been for the old man. He was dropping off flowers in a secluded graveyard in the middle of the afternoon, when some girl, drenched in sweat and with matted hair, and blood dripping out of her nose, starts coming towards him, yelling, "Billy! Come on, Billy!" over and over again, with a voice so deep it sounds like a demon. So the man I creeped down the graveyard today, let's meet sometime so I can try to explain what just happened. This encounter happened roughly 13 years ago when I was 10. It was in a small town in New Jersey where nothing bad ever happened. It was safe and boring, or so I thought. I didn't have many friends growing up, so I'd take my Game Boy Advance and sit under willow trees in the cemetery, next to our house, playing to my heart's content until it was pitch dark outside. The cemetery was quite big, and it began outside our house and ended a few streets down, where the highway was. Even though it was a cemetery, it didn't have that many graves, so it was more like a park than anything. You could see most of the cemetery from our backyard, and my mom would sit at the patio just to keep an eye on me. The cemetery had a funeral home on site, and caretakers lived there too. I would often see the caretakers around and even became acquainted with them. As I got older, I was 10 at the time, my mom started to trust me a little bit. I was given my first Nokia, which I was to have on me at all times, and I would receive a call every 15 minutes or so from my mom. She warned me that if I didn't pick up, she was calling the police. With my newfound freedom, I decided one day to venture further into the cemetery. It was beginning to get dark, and the trees were much denser in that part, with old graves that looked as though the ground swallowed them up. I distinctly remember a chill running down my back as I heard a tree branch snap behind me. I quickly turned around and came face to face with a stranger. My first thought was that he was one of the caretakers, but then I realized that I didn't recognize him. He wore a gray suit and had long hair, and seemed friendly as he smiled at me. "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you," he said, taking a step back. I let out a sigh of relief as I stupidly figured he was here for a funeral. I didn't say anything and nervously smiled, feeling awkward in that situation. I prayed that he would just leave so I could continue exploring, but instead he gazed around the area. I noticed his hands were trembling and he had a slight tick in his eye. "You live around here?" he asked, and this time he took a step forward. Even though he was smiling, the gaze in his eyes made me uncomfortable. I felt pure fear sink in. I took a step back and didn't dare speak a word. I was thinking of ways to escape the situation, but I wasn't a fast runner. My phone was in my front jean pocket, and I was too scared that if I took it out, it might anger him. Just as he took another step forward, my phone started to ring. "That's my mom," I announced, and quickly answered the call. The last thing I remember was seeing the annoyance on his face as I walked away and out of sight, all the while talking to my mom on the phone about some random stuff. I remember stumbling over a shovel on my way out of the cemetery, but I didn't think too much of it. I ran home and gave my mom a big hug, but I didn't tell her what happened. I didn't want to worry her. Frankly, I just wanted to forget it ever happened. The next day, my mom discovered the garage door was damaged. Someone had tried to break the lock and managed to lift the door by a few centimeters. I remember bursting into tears and having a full-blown panic attack as I explained to my mom what happened at the cemetery. That man obviously tried to break into our house, and I could only imagine what would have happened if he succeeded. My mom called the cops and everything, but in the end, they weren't able to find him.